Welcome back to our very interesting discussion on junctions in psychotherapy. We were at a very beautiful turning point of understanding of these junctions. In this part 2, we're going to cover how does the junction not speak of a paradigm difficulty and how the junctions are not being resolved for so long.
Taking up the first one, it's a very interesting question. Why the junctions remain as junctions for so long? If psychotherapy is progressing, psychoanalysis is progressing, then over a period of time, we should be resolving the junctions and reducing the number of junctions. Because as we said before, every junction is a statement that we don't know for sure. We know probabilistically. So why doesn't this journey from probabilistic knowledge to certain knowledge happen? Why junctions remain junctions for so long unresolved as junctions? This brings in a very important reflection on the history of psychoanalysis. If you look at all the schools in psychoanalysis and the founders of the school, if we try to understand why junctions have remained junctions, the first reflection that occurs to us is the best part of psychoanalysis from this point of view was the early part of psychoanalysis. That we may have had a birth trauma, but it was a very progressive time, early part of psychoanalysis, because we had system creators like Freud and Jung.
Right.
These were the people who were not only analyzing phenomena, trying to find out psychoanalytic reason for a pathology, trying to find out how to treat that reason and evolving therapy technique for it. But they were system builders in the sense they would create a model of the mind. And the pathology, the pathogenesis will be explained in terms of the model of the mind. And of course, it goes the other way around, because initially you discover a few phenomena, and from there you put together your insights from many phenomena to create a structure of them. So that's the way it evolves. But after they have presented the model of the mind, when a learning person looks at it, for him, it's very clear. There is a model of the mind. From there, you talk about pathogenesis. And from there, you talk about the healing method. So these two are system creators. After that, unfortunately, in psychoanalysis, we did not have good system creators. We had Lacan, who did create his model of the mind, but he was a crackpot who went into a Disneyland of his own. So that never happened. It's a crisis of geniuses, that the genius we would need to create a new school which would integrate existing schools. Those type of geniuses psychoanalysis did not have. They had geniuses, but not that category. We had second category of geniuses. We never had a Freud Jung type of geniuses. We had people who were into phenomena analysis, like Klein, like Bion, but they never went into the more difficult aspect of model of them. So from that point of view, I classify all schools of psychoanalysis into 4 categories. Full school, 3/4 school, half school, and a quarter school. And I say that if a school has a philosophy, a model of the mind, pathogenesis, and healing technique, 4 elements. Let's say each of them represents 25%, you become a full school. Now, no school in psychoanalysis gets into philosophy.
True.
So there is no full school in psychoanalysis. Contrary to this, when we look at Hindu psychology, we have full schools. Sri Aurobindo school is a full school. Tantra school is a full school. Certain parts of Vaishnava Tantra are full schools. Certain parts of Tibetan Buddhism, they almost become full schools. Now, these full schools need not be more powerful than half schools. Like, it's possible that half school may explain and heal 5 pathologies, whereas they can heal only 3 pathologies. Quite possible. But from a structural standpoint, these are full schools. Now, in psychoanalysis, we don't have any full school because no school goes into philosophy. The maximum schools go is from the clinical area to meta-psychology, not even to the philosophy of mind. Leave aside the philosophy of life. So there is no school of psychoanalysis from that point, which is a full school. But we have 3/4 school. The Jungian school is a 3/4 school. The Freudian school is a 3/4 school. Recent times, Lacanian school is a 3/4 school. Although I consider much of the Lacanian part as trash, but it is still a structural point of view, a 3/4 school, and a very interesting school. And some of the ideas are very good, very original. Although much of it is trash, but some of the ideas are very good and very original and very good sounding. It's really a delight to get into it from a aesthetic and from a language standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, creative standpoint.
Exactly.
So you have full schools, which is the 3/4 schools, which is the Freudian, Jungian, and Lacanian. And then we have half schools. So most of the schools in psychoanalysis actually are half schools. Like Klein, like Winnicott, like Kohut. They don't get into the philosophy. They don't get into the model of the mind. Even for that matter, I would say psychodrama. I would say ISTDP. I would say EDT. They don't get into the philosophy. They don't get into the model of the mind. What they do is they have some take on pathogenesis. So if we talk about Kleinian school, Winnicottian school, Kohutian school, they have some take on how pathology develops and therefore how to do therapy. So there is a very distinct area of knowledge in pathogenesis, a very distinct area of knowledge in how to heal it, the technique. But does not go into philosophy, does not go into model of the mind. So in fact, most of the schools in psychoanalysis actually are half schools. And then we have quarter schools. Some schools which don't even go into pathogenesis, but go only into technique. That we don't want to bother about how the problem has occurred. But now that the problem has occurred, we know certain things to do which will give relief to the problem.
Like CBT, DBT.
Yeah, many of them will not go into the deep pathogenesis. CBT will definitely go in the sense that we'll talk about the core beliefs and something rooted there. But let us say if we go to pranic healing. Pranic healing does not engage itself with how it happened. But it does engage itself with how to heal. So then but the very strange part here is that pranic healing is a 3/4 school. Pathogenesis missing. Pranic healing as a philosophy, as a model of the mind, does not have pathogenesis, but has a healing technique. It's a very strange model.
Don't they have pathogenesis in their own terminology, other than the psychic versions and from apart from the world of psychology?
No, they have only essential 3 things. They have energy blockage, energy depletion, and possession.
Right, but these terminologies are not from the world of psychology, but definitely some different phenomena.
Yes. So if you grant the respect of rigor to this essential pathogenesis, it becomes a full school.
Right.
If you don't grant respect of rigor to this essential pathogenesis, then it does not get into the specifics of how it has happened. So it does not get into the comprehensive pathogenesis, it does get into essential pathogenesis.
Essential.
And that is true for most of energy healing techniques. Reiki, crystal healing, even the martial art Shaolin techniques. They will not get into the detailed pathogenesis, they will get into essential pathogenesis.
Essential pathogenesis.
Which chakra is affected? Is it blockage or depletion? Is it possession or no possession? And all you do is clean the chakra, energize the chakra, and thereby balance the chakra. So it is essential pathogenesis, essential healing. You don't get into details of where this energy is coming from, why this white energy only, why has nature not created a chocolate form of energy, strawberry form of energy. You don't get into those kind of theoretical intricacies. You essentially focus on the results and essential knowledge on both the sides, pathogenesis and healing.
The phenomena itself.
Yeah. So they are very phenomenological. Should not say phenomenological in the sense of that they are phenomenological, definitely. Not phenomenological, they are essential in one sense. And they don't get into actually the phenomena of pathogenesis in a detailed way. They're essential on both the sides. So these are some of the interesting things when you talk about full schools. Now, the difficulty is, how does this relate to the junction? Unless you have a full school, if you don't create a full school, you cannot resolve your own junctions, and there's no question of resolving junctions of somebody else or between you and somebody else. So the junctions will get resolved only when you have a full school, and the full school is able to explain the phenomena you are pointing out to as a specific instance of its function. So this is one of the difficulties of psychoanalysis, that we don't really have those kind of system creators. And now what we need is not only system creators, but system creators come integrators who can integrate different schools. And that quality of people we have not produced, psychoanalysis has not produced. One of the reasons is knowing each school itself has become so complicated and so time consuming that to know the fundamentals very clearly of different schools and then apply it to a disorder, and we have almost 150 disorders to apply things to, and then to look at integrating all of this, and then to create the most difficult thing, the model of the mind, it's a very Herculean task. So we have not found actually people of that caliber. So in that sense, it's a crisis of a genius. And that's one of the reasons why junctions not only exist as they are unresolved, but actually number of junctions is increasing. Because the more knowledge we develop, right, in all the schools, the more points there are where there are contradictions. So we have a non-coherent development of knowledge in psychoanalysis. And therefore, it's the crisis of a genius of how to integrate all of it. I have done something.
Sir, what about your model in this? How you have tried to bring it forth?
Yeah, so I have tried to play the Lord of the Universe, and of psychoanalysis and the Eastern psychology in the model HEAT, holistic elemental analysis and therapy. So lo and behold, I am here as a savior of psychoanalysis. And I think the system is a good starting point. And if we can refine the system further in the next 5 years and create a more internally consistent and inter-school explaining, integrating, overarching system, we will be resolving not only many issues of intra-school rivalry, inter-school rivalry, but also we'll be generating a far more comprehensive and deep and a holistic healing system. So one of the outcomes of this discussion is the moment you realize the difficulty of junctions and the increase in the number of junctions and the need to resolve them, you are automatically led to create a creation of a more holistic and comprehensive system. It's one of the outcomes of this focus on the junctions.
Creating an omnipotent model.
So my own search for omnipotence leads me to
that. Right. So since we are seeing like that there are problems in integrating these, and now they're coexisting, some are contrary, some are in hand, they're interchangeable also. Does the junction itself does not speak of a paradigm of difficulty? The entire learning what we have created today with you itself is saying that junction itself is doing so. So how would you explain that?
The junctions, some of the junctions exist because of technique differences, and their technique differences in turn come out of the fundamental conceptual differences. Two of the core unresolved issues from a functional standpoint. So there are two parts here. The structural unresolved part of model of the mind, and the functional phenomenological aspect of the functioning of mind and pathology. So let us say, what are the two questions in the functional part of it? First question is, at the root, what is pathology? How is it created? At the root, deeper than the phenomena. For example, we are not talking here of whether it is repressed homosexuality or the split being open and the bare breast attack coming back. That's a phenomenological thing. But if we go deeper and we talk in terms of more elemental entities, then we can say, is pathology creation primarily a thought phenomenon, an affect phenomena, or a behavioral phenomenon? Now, at that level, we are really not clear. Take, for example, the whole concept of the hydraulic model, which we will do in a subsequent episode in details. But what was Freud's conception of pathology? The hydraulic model started with Freud. Freud's conception was that why does a disorder arise? His take was that a traumatic event happens in which there is an idea and a feeling together, and both of them are unacceptable and remain unconscious, repressed, and from there they cause difficulty. So there was what was the traumatic core was in the unconscious because of a traumatic experience. So there is a traumatic experience. The traumatic experience leaves behind a traumatic core in the unconscious. Right? That core is responsible for pathology, and that core essentially has two things: thought and affect. And Freud's understanding was that if the thought part of it becomes conscious, the relief is partial, 10 to 15%. But the core resolution happens when the affect is released in catharsis. So the affect which is...
And it can also be to do with the effect generation is more related to the infant state, right? Where the thoughts are not so clear and concrete in nature. So are the behaviors.
Right. So for him, the core of pathology was the hydraulic model. That just as in a hydraulic system, we see water flowing in and creating pressure, and when the pressure becomes too high, it bursts open the lid and flows out. And if you don't want that bursting to happen, you have to give some outlet and open the outlet so it flows out. So the container fills up and the container is emptied, and if it is not emptied, it blows out. So essentially pathology was overflowing of repressed affect beyond the containing capacity of the person. So it was essentially a hydraulic model, which is primarily based upon affect. That affect is generated, that generated affect is very high. Part of it can be expressed or not expressed. Part of it can be worked upon by defenses, right, and thrown into sublimation or something else. Part of it can be repressed, but the excess affect, which cannot be managed in any way, gets into symptom formation. And the way out is to release that affect through catharsis. So this is a hydraulic model, which is based upon treating pathology primarily as a affect outcome. And the affect is treated almost like a hydraulic substance, which is generated or flows in, fills up a bucket, overflows, and can be emptied out in catharsis. So essentially, it is a two phenomena process, cathexis and catharsis. And cathexis is preceded by generation of affect.
Generation.
So, or you can call both of them together if you want to include generation of affect as a part of cathexis. But essentially, it is a hydraulic model. Now, if you go into schools of Lacan, beyond, or if you go into cognitive therapies or logotherapy, they are not into hydraulic model. So they don't get into this thing of affect is pent up, affect has to be released. Klein is midway. For Klein, the core is internalization of good, reliable, stable object. Now, once you say that internalization of a good, reliable, stable object and closing of the split is primary, these two are not hydraulic phenomena.
But these are the container phenomena.
Yeah, so this phenomena are very different. That Klein would say that these phenomena actually precede even the containing capability. Hello? Yeah. So,
yes, sir.
So the moment you get into this Kleinian conceptualization of closing the split, and even more importantly, internalization of a good, reliable, stable object as the core of, as one of the important elements of healing, it's a non-hydraulic idea. So when you go to Lacan and you want to provide signifiers linking up with the unconscious phenomena which is causing pathology, that again becomes a non-hydraulic idea. When you get into Kohut, where mirroring becomes important, it again becomes a non-hydraulic idea. When you go into Jung and you talk about individuation, it again becomes a non-hydraulic idea. Absolutely. When you go to logotherapy and you talk about meaning that heals, it again becomes a non-hydraulic idea. So
ISTDP would be somewhere.
It's hydraulic.
It's hydraulic.
It's hydraulic. So let us say this is a deeper question of hydraulic conceptualization and healing of pathology, and a non-hydraulic conceptualization and healing of pathology. And obviously, in some patients, X would be operative, some patients, Y would be operative. Now, how do you integrate these two? Because it's a very important junction. that a person comes to you with pathology, do you look at it from hydraulic standpoint or non-hydraulic standpoint? It's one of the very big junctions in psychoanalysis. How do you look at it? Because if you look at it from a hydraulic standpoint, you will be aiming at catharsis in therapy. If you are not looking at it from a hydraulic standpoint, you will be looking at something else.
Maybe integration, maybe closing of the split.
Yeah, because one of the most hydraulic spools is ISTD. It's completely hydraulic spool. So how do you resolve this kind of junctions? Okay? One of the important junctions is the hydraulic versus non-hydraulic junctions. And then within non-hydraulic junctions, again, you have junctions. The internalization of a good, reliable, stable object versus providing meaning to oneself. It's a very important junction. Say Kohut and Klein. Klein would call for internalization of a good, reliable, stable object. And Kohut would say, if it has not happened, let's say internalization of a good, reliable, stable object has not happened. We find in therapy this is true. Now, Klein would say, why has it not happened? One of the issues can be envy. That there was envy of the good object and therefore a resistance to internalize it. There was too much of hatred and anger towards it. Kohut would say that in the real world, the objects were not good enough for a healthy self to be formed. And Klein would say, what you call formation of healthy self is a derivative of internalization of a good, reliable, stable object. So you are referring to internalization of real life objects outside. And we are referring to outside and inside both objects, and you are not factoring in envy in the internalization process.
Right.
So now this is a very interesting junction, a conceptual junction. That both are referring to not being able to internalize a good object. In one case, it is outside object. In second case, it is outside and inside object. In one case, the focus is not on internalization. The focus is on its outcome of creating a stable self without referring to internalization.
Internalization.
Now, should we bring in internalization in creation of the self or should we not? If we bring in, this becomes one specific type of internalization and a specific consequence of internalization. So these are the kind of junctions, conceptual and applied, that we'll have to negotiate through to really resolve some junctions. And as we go along and as we move from west to the east, questions of purpose of life, purpose of mind, karma, they will come in. So then we are not only looking at the thought, affect, and behavior in ordinary sense, we'll also have to factor in transpersonal. The transpersonal will have genetic intergenerational as well as the collective intergenerational. We'll have to factor in the reincarnational. We'll have to factor in the spiritual. And only when we factor in all these aspects, we'll get into a situation where we'll move from the traditional biopsycho element to biopsychosocial element to biopsychosocial transgenerational reincarnational and spiritual. Now this creates this whole framework of that canvas. And in that framework, if we are able to create a comprehensive model of the mind, which cannot not have philosophy, which cannot not have spirituality, then we will probably be looking at a holistic system of healing, which will resolve many of these junctions, which at present to us a paradox, a problem, a challenge, a difficulty, and often a trap where we make mistakes. So this holistic approach, if we are able to do it in the next 25 years, we will be addressing and resolving to a great extent the problem of the junctions.
Illuminating discussion it was for me, and hope it was for the viewers. See you all again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you, Dr. Vaidya. Thank you, viewers. Namaste.
Namaste.